So, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah, amma ba'd. So we're looking at dawah in Britain, in a post-monotheistic Britain, where the culture is not a religious culture. It's no longer a Christian culture. It's more of an atheistic culture, even if many people will ascribe themselves to Christianity, but for all practical purposes, there is this atheistic outlook as if God isn't there. And atheism actually is growing across Europe and mainland Britain. And so we're looking at how to do dawah in a post-religious, post-monotheistic Britain. And we started last week by looking at something that Sheikh Mufti Taqi, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, mentioned about lisan al-qawm, knowing the language of the people, based upon a verse in the Quran. And he said words to the effect of that lisan al-qawm, knowing the language of the people. We never sent a prophet except that he had the language of his people. Mufti Taqi makes the point that it's not just being able to speak the language which counts, but the prophets, alayhi salatu wasalam, they were from the people. Okay, so the people could relate to them, and they could relate to the people, not just through language, but through urf and ada, through customs and conventions. This was their urf, this was their ada, this was their people, and of course this was their language. So he makes a point that lisan al-qawm, language of the people, isn't limited to speaking the language of the people, but also having the urf and the ada and the customs and conventions, and also the kind of you just feel part of the community. You relate to it, they relate to you. And based upon that, if we go back down, go to point 4, sorry, if we just, and then I'll just read it as a recap. So we're reading these 3 or 4 points from point 4 to point 6 or 7, and we've covered this last week, so I won't make any points, hopefully. So in a Britain where 1 in 3 people now believe there are Muslim-run no-go areas across the country, and where 2/3 of the public claim they know little or nothing about Islam, most saying that whatever little they do know is learned from the media, and where 1 in 4 people don't believe in God, compared to 1 in 10 people in 1998, and where over 50% of the nation say that they have no religious affiliation, then being unrelatable is not an option. Our greatest job, our greatest vocation as Muslims then is to heal our country's growing enmity towards Tawheed, towards Abrahamic monotheism, not exacerbate it, meaning not make it worse. Okay, not make it worse by pushing people away from Tawheed. How is it that there's a sizable presence of Muslims in Britain, about 5% of the population, that's what we are, and yet atheism is relentlessly on the rise? It suggests that current hostilities to religiousness aside, okay, leaving those hostilities that are there, we Muslims need to be better fit for purpose. Okay, and as Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote in one of his poems, "'Tis not too late to seek a newer world." So point 5, I cite the above statistics not to incite fear or panic or some sense of defeatism, but simply as a sense of urgency in revisiting current trends of doing dawah to Tawheed, of inviting to Abrahamic monotheism. As such, strategies or any strategy that undermines wise and Sharia-guided inculturation, not assimilation, inculturation, where we inculturate ourselves, where we become part and parcel of the culture, the cultural norms become our norms, okay, in as much as the Sharia allows it to, because there are certain cultural norms that the Sharia will prohibit. So, for example, this country one of the great cultural norms is a pub-going culture and a drinking culture. Okay, Friday night, let's go down to the pub. Someone's birthday, let's go down to the pub. You got promoted, let's go down to the pub. I busted up with my girlfriend, let's go down to the pub and drink away my sorrows. It's a drinking culture. And so when Islam says we must enculturate ourselves, only in as much as the Sharia guided principles allow. And of course, going to the pub is haram. Haram li ghayrihi, not li dhatihi. It's haram to go to the pub whether we drink or not. If we drink, it's haram li dhatihi. It's haram in and of itself because a person is going to the pub to drink alcohol. So it's haram in and of itself. But if I say, no, I'll just go and have an orange juice with my friends, then it's haram li ghayrihi, okay? Because it's haram due to other factors other than the fact that I'm going to drink alcohol, because I'm not. In this case, it's sitting down where the signs of Allah are being neglected or mocked, as the Quran says. And there is some tafsir behind that tells us that that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, rahmatullah alayhi, when he was told by some of his administrators that there are some Muslims who are drinking with some of the non-Muslims in a hall, sitting around the table, are at an event with non-Muslims in a hall, and the non-Muslims are drinking, but alhamdulillah, the Muslims aren't drinking. He said, flog all of them and start with the Muslims. And then he was told, but no, you don't understand. The Muslims are not drinking alcohol. They're just there with their non-Muslim friends who are drinking alcohol. He said, haven't they heard of the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that do not sit where the signs of Allah are being mocked and opposed? And so here one of the commands of Allah is being opposed. Drinking. So then he said that you should make an exception of them and start by flogging the Muslims. Anyway, so there are certain parts of the culture that we couldn't enculturate ourselves into. Because why? Because the Sharia doesn't allow it. But otherwise, the normal Sharia rule is al-ada muhakkama. One of the 5 famous qawaid of the Sharia. Okay, one of the 5 famous maxims of Islamic law is al-ada muhakkama. Cultural norms, or ada, they say in Urdu, adat. Ada, cultural norms take on the position of a ruling, of a hukum. Meaning, where Islam is silent, where the Quran and the Sunnah are silent on something, then the culture will dictate whether that thing can be done or cannot be done, should be done, should or shouldn't be done. Okay. So that's important. So I cite the above statistics not to incite fear or panic, but as such, strategies that undermine wise and Sharia-guided enculturation, not assimilation, or that erect religiously unwanted alienation between the Ummatul Ijaba and the Ummatul Dawah must be swiftly remedied. This, as Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad says, imposes the duty, painful for some, of shedding the urf and the ada decorations of foreign lands. A British Muslim who insists on wearing Arab or Asian garb and clinging to an Arab or Asian cultural outlook is unlikely to endear monotheism to the wider public, who will see them as alien, unrelatable, unable to envisage how Islam might be for the British people. And we ended up by connecting the Eid al-Adha story, that Abrahamic story, the Ismail story, to this idea of enculturation. I think I mentioned to you, did I mention to you, or was it to another group of people I mentioned, that in the end, Ismail alayhi salam, you know, he and his mother, the lady Hagar, Hajara, they're taken to Makkah. No one is there. It's a barren valley. And she finds the Zamzam well. But very soon the Jurham tribe came from Yemen. They're just traveling kind of nomads, okay, Bedouin, and they're moving up from down south of Arabia in Yemen, and they're crossing the Hijaz, and they come across Hajara and her son and the Zamzam well, and they ask to settle there, and she allows them, and they settle there permanently. Okay, and Ismail alayhi salam, he eventually marries into the Jurham tribe, and he learns their language. What language was it? Arabic. Okay, so his mother didn't say, oh well, and you know, your father is from the Middle East, he's from the land of Canaan, the land of Iraq, we have our own language, we have our own customs there. Or she didn't say, look, I'm an Egyptian maidservant gifted to Ibrahim alayhi salam, so I will teach you the Egyptian language and the Egyptian culture and customs. And they didn't do that. It's just common sense that, look, we're now with the people. We have to do as the people do, within boundaries of Sharia and within boundaries of obeying Allah. We do what the people do, and the people's way is our way. The people's customs is our customs. So a British Muslim, that is a Muslim who has made Britain his home, his or her home, or is born and bred in Britain, or has migrated to Britain and has become home, whatever reason. When Britain is home, how can we then have the urf and the aada of a foreign Muslim land? Arabia, Egypt, Pakistan, Bangladesh. It's now, if it was unacceptable before, it's even more unacceptable when we know this pushes people away. But of course, as I said, when dawah is not our main concern, when Islam isn't our main concern, and just making a life here is a main concern, then people will do anything, and Sharia rules don't really matter too much. So that brought us on to point 6. If dawah is the prime reason to legitimize our presence here, then we are duty bound to urgently dispense with these unnecessary overseas urf embellishments in order not to be responsible for tanfir, not takfir, tanfir, which is alienating and repelling people. The Prophet ﷺ says, Bashiru wa la tunaffiru. Okay, give tabshir, good news. Don't make tanfir, don't repel people. Yassiru wa la tu'assiru. Give glad tidings, don't repel people. Make things easy, do not make things difficult. So, except with the language of his people isn't limited to speech. It also involves a certain degree of cultural affinity and familiarity with what makes the people what they are, which is to say, the da'i should know and be relatable to the mad'u, to those whom he is giving dawah to. Point 7. Whilst dawah is a constant duty and concern upon every Muslim, it is currently the privilege of a growing minority who realize we are not here primarily to be consumers or to improve our material welfare or to live cozy lives. For that reason, and this is something new today, point 7 is something new. For that reason, we could even say that the history of Islam in Britain is much younger than the history of Muslims in Britain. Okay. Muslims in Britain, I'm not talking about one or two individual Muslims who came during Queen Victoria's reign and, whatever. I'm talking about on a sizable community. The first sizable Muslim community were Yemeni sailors who fought with the British in their wars. And by the late 1800s, some of them serving on British ships, they made their home, or they lived here in the UK, in the United Kingdom, particularly in Wales, and established homes and community, small community. Okay, that was in the late 1800s. But they weren't here for Islam. They were just Muslims who happened to be here and are still here. Yemeni communities, there are sizable numbers of them in Wales and up and down the rest of the UK. So that's Muslims in Britain, but Islam in Britain? Well, let's read on. For only with dawah with deliberate adoption of summoning and calling others to Ar-Rahman, our merciful Lord, as the central principle, could we claim in any meaningful way that Islam arrived on these shores? Okay, what I wrote there, the rest is just poetry. On these shores, to this royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle. It's how Shakespeare in Richard III describes Britain. It's probably one of the most moving, touching descriptions of any land or country that you'll ever read about. And of course, he wrote it about Britain or about England. And he used some of the phrases he uses, this royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle. It's a very famous 5 or 6 lines in Richard III in his play. Those who emigrated here with other intentions are urged to redress this matter within themselves. As we said, Sharia-wise, there is discussion about, is it permissible even for Muslims to live in amongst the non-Muslims in the non-Muslim lands unless they can safeguard some of their basic religious duties and symbols, and also if they're doing dawah. Some scholars have said that if they're not doing dawah, then they're not allowed to be here. There's a discussion. So dawah is really important. So Muslims have been here since the late 1800s in small communities, and then by the 1950s and 60s we were here in droves, and by the 70s we were here in larger droves. But Islam, really, the dawah really only starts in a serious way. We have mosques, the first generation building mosques, and alhamdulillah, Allah bless them, they're setting up halal meat places. But really, the dawah really only starts in that kind of the 80s, the early 80s, in any meaningful way. Late 70s, early 80s. And those Muslims who are not part of the dawah in any form or fashion, neither supporting it with money, with their du'as, with their good character, or by learning knowledge themselves, or by supporting the scholars, or so on and so forth, then they have to really reconsider their intentions. And are they doing things that are pleasing to Allah or making their Lord angry? So point 8. So that was about urf. Why to mention that is because it's still, unfortunately, a problem. We are still British Muslims. There's too many of us who still have an Arab mentality or a Pakistani mentality, Bengali mentality, a foreign mentality, and there's no reason to, unless, of course, this isn't my home. I'm only here to study. Then I'm going home to Malaysia, to Pakistan, to UAE, or wherever I'm from, and that's fine. That's fine. You know that you're not really here. You know, this is not your country. You will be going back. Bismillah. Why do you have to adopt the urf and the adat of a foreign country that is not your urf and adat? But if that isn't the case, then why are we adopting foreign urf and adat, which neither the Sunnah teaches us to do, nor does the Sharia command us to do, and nor does the Seerah even encourage us to do? So though point 5, 6, and 7 were all about this kind of lisanul hal, understanding the people and being relatable to them, and them being able to relate to us. Why? Not so that we can be nice friends. The goal is not to be friends or not to be friends. The goal is to invite people to Allah. To invite people to Allah. So point 8, we move on to something slightly different in the dawah. The Holy Quran says, call to the path of your Lord with wisdom and kindly exhortation, maw'idatul hasana. Invite to the path of your Lord with wisdom, with hikmah, and good exhortation, good maw'idah, and argue or reason with them in the most courteous manner. وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Also, the Quran says, had you been stern or harsh-hearted, they would have surely dispersed from around you. If you were harsh, Allah's saying to the Prophet, if you were harsh with people, they would have run away from you. And about the prophets Musa and Harun, Moses and Aaron, peace be upon them both, we read, go, both of you, to Pharaoh, for he has indeed transgressed the bounds. Speak to him gently. فَقُولُ لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا. Okay, speak to him قَوْلٌ لَيِّنًا, a gentle word. لَأَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرَ أَوْ يَخْشَى, that perhaps, maybe, he will take heed or he will fear God, fear Allah. So overall then, our dawah must be one of tabshir and taysir. Remember these words, tabshir and taysir, of giving tabshir, glad tidings, and of making taysir, making things easy. Based upon that hadith, based upon that hadith in Sahih Muslim, and there's a hadith, other hadiths like that in Sahih Bukhari. In fact, quite often the Prophet has said this on a number of occasions when he sent people as da'is to various communities. He said it to Mu'adh ibn Jabal when he sent Mu'adh to Yemen. He said it to Abu Musa al-Ashari when he sent Abu Musa somewhere. He said it to this particular Sahabi when he sent this Sahabi somewhere for da'wah. And he would remind them, okay, that bashiru wa la tunaffiru, yassiru wa la tu'assiru. Okay, so from here it's very, very clear, and from the ayats it's very, very clear, and the seerah of the Prophet is clear. Tabshir and taysir, giving glad tidings and making things easy. The alim or the da'i, when they exhort anyone, it must be with wisdom and kindness. When they enjoin good, it must be with mildness and facilitating ease. And when they forbid wrong, inkarul munkar, it must be done with gentleness, clemency, and compassion. Indeed, even when the scholar or the da'i strive to do justice, they must try whenever it's munasib or appropriate to do justice with a light touch. To do justice with a light touch. Meaning that you don't, when sometimes, justice is always a tough one, especially when the decision goes against you. But it's just. The judge heard both sides of the argument. He weighed up the evidences or the statements, and he came to the conclusion that this one he has the haqq and this one he has no haqq. The one who has no haqq, no right, it's a bitter pill to swallow. Now sometimes people, so be it, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. There's nothing you can do, but sometimes you can soften the blow a bit by not doing justice so badly, so strictly. You can do justice a bit milder. So that's what it means, doing justice with a gentle touch or with a light touch. One famous hadith says, indeed, Allah is gentle and loves gentleness. He gives to gentleness what he doesn't give to harshness and what he doesn't give to other than it. Okay, so that's kind of clear, and we don't need to spend a long time on that. And alhamdulillah, on that front, I personally think things are getting overall better with the idea of being gentle. Gentle doesn't mean that we can't be firm. One can be firm and gentle. Our problem is just ignorant people talking about things that they don't have knowledge of. That becomes more of a problem than harshness. It's not that harshness isn't there. Young people tend not to have young people have not yet to develop mildness, hilm. Elder people tend to just, however they were in their young age, when you get to a certain age, it's, being angry all the time and being harsh, it just doesn't befit your character, nor does it become part of your character. You just kind of lose that habit. A lot of people in their old age become much more mild, even without trying. Young people, they have the problem more so. But I suspect that things are getting better. People know that they shouldn't be harsh in dawah. And I think people are less harsh now than they were before, but it's still there. Anyway, point 9, which is related to point 8 about tabshir and taysir, the path of making giving good news and making things easy. So here is one of my observations about this. It seems there's a rising trend to skip over the stricter passages of the Quran in terms of it being a warning or an admonition and an ultimatum to not take the ungodly path to hell. But how is such strict stuff in the Quran? There is warnings of hell, warnings of punishment, warnings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah Jalla Jalaluhu's anger. So how is all this strict stuff tabshir, right? How is that giving good news, right? The answer is that it isn't, right? It's not tabshir, it's tahzir, warning, right? Warning. You have tabshir and then you have tahzir, okay? Giving good news, giving warning. You have making things easy, you have making things difficult. So the Quran says, this Quran has been revealed to me that I may warn you with it. I may warn you with the Quran and whomsoever it may reach. So we must remember that along with describing our Prophet ﷺ as a mercy to the worlds, the Quran also says, O Prophet, we have indeed sent you as a witness and as a bearer of good news and as a warner and as a summoner to Allah by his permission and as a light-giving lamp. Okay, so in this beautiful celebrated verse of Surah Al-Ahzab, the Prophet is described as someone who's a shahid, who is a witness to the truth, okay, and someone who gives tabshir, bashir, he's a giver of good news, and he's nadhir, a warner, and he is da'in ilallah bi'idnihi, and he is a caller to Allah by the permission of Allah, and he's sirajun munir, a light-giving lamp. So the da'i, along with wisdom, patience, mildness, familiarity, and genuine concern, should follow in the prophetic footsteps by being both bashir and nadhir, sometimes inviting, whilst at other times summoning and warning, knowing just what medicine to best administer and when, knowing when to make tabshir and knowing when to make tahdhir. But there is one more point that I'd like to make on on this, which is on point 10. Having said that, having said the above, those with wiser heads, now I'm talking about really seasoned scholars. There are two types of scholars. In this discussion, I want you to think of two types of scholars, not that there are two types of scholars, but there is that type of scholarly heritage, that scholarly turath, whereby from day one, the ulama, they always go out and mix with the public and mix with the amat and nas, the ordinary Muslims, and, and are very, very approachable. And then there is the ulama who, from day one, they kind of were aloof from the public, and they were mainly in their houses or in their libraries or in the palace of the king, trying to advise the king or the sultan or the amir or whomsoever. And it wasn't the norm that they would, as a class of people, as an ulama class of people, mix with the common people. Of course, they, individually they might mix with the common people now and again, but it wasn't really their way. I think one of the best examples is if you take Hadramaut, the valley in Yemen, Hadramaut, and see the scholarship there, and also Malaysian scholarship, Indonesian Indonesian scholarship. You find from the beginning of Indonesian history, which was from about 15th century, and if you see from the beginning of Yemeni scholarship in the Hadramaut Valley, right from like the 2nd century of Islam, really the ulama were mixing with the people. The best example that I can think of where the ulama generally don't mix with the people is the ulama class during the Mughal times, Mughal India. On the whole, the Indian ulama don't mix with the awam, the public. In fact, if you take the Delhi Sultanate in its kind of early phase, it doesn't even mix with the non-Muslims to give dawah, right? It's just woof, it's just there. And there are a number of reasons for that. It's not all neglect, but there are reasons for that. And that kind of scholarship, that became the kind of established norm. I'm not saying that's the way that all of Indian scholarship is even now, but historically that has how it's been. There are advantages and disadvantages. The level of tahqiq that comes out of Indian scholarship sometimes you think is far better than some tahqiq that comes out of the scholarship of other areas. But for dawah, the level of knowing how to interact with the people and the greater wisdoms in dawah, then, you know, a lot of that comes not just with dua and ilm, a lot of it comes with experience and being with people. So whatever the case, whatever type, whatever scholar or wherever they're raised, when I'm saying, having said that, those with wiser heads, I mean those scholars who really have had that turath, that tradition of dawah as their scholarly norm, okay, as their scholarly norm, like it is in the Hadramaut, amongst the Habaib of Yemen, amongst the Sayyids of Yemen, even now. Okay, even if you're a talib al-ilm there, okay, before you start giving khutbahs and whatever, they will make sure that you have spent a few months just walking the bazaars and the markets and the streets and mixing with the people, so that when you start preaching to the people on the pulpit on Friday, you know the people and you know their peculiarities, their idiosyncrasies, you know their hal, you know their lisan hal, as well as their actual lisan. So those with wiser heads and deeper spiritual insights and greater experience teach us that the nature of post-religious Britain is such that its people do not normally respond well to tahdhir. I'm not talking about in the West. I'm talking about Britain. Britain, even in its Christian days, did not really respond well to tahdhir, to warnings. Britain as a religious community, even in its earlier days, didn't like when preachers are yelling about hell and punishment and this, that. It would put off your average Englishman from listening to the preacher, okay? But if you go to certain parts of America, even today, like the Bible Belt, okay, like in certain places in Texas, and you know where the Bible Belt is, if you don't shout and scream and tell them about God's punishment and God's wrath and anger, then really you haven't done any proper preaching at all, right? And I always tell this story. Well, I don't always tell it, but I often tell this story that one of the first times I went to America, they asked me to do a khutbah. I was meant to do 2 khutbahs on 2 separate Fridays. So the first Friday, I went to this masjid. Most of the masjid was filled with Asian-looking people, and I gave my khutbah, and it was really kind of fiery. I was a young man then, and had that kind of Salafi mentality, and it was a fiery khutbah. And a lot of young people came up to me afterwards, and mashallah, they liked it and everything like that, as you'd expect. but there were a number of elders also who waited and waited. They waited and waited until all these youngsters had come and thanked me and, and asked about me and whatever. Then it came to their turn. And I think like at least 10 of them said, beta, Abu Ali Asab, beta, this shouting kind of thing, this is not good. You have to be calm and you have to talk gently and so on and so forth. I thought, oh, subhanAllah, and these people were from India. They were all kind of Desis from India, settled in America, middle class, well educated, very nice people. I thought, okay, I'll remember that. So come next Friday, I walked into another masjid. I went to another masjid, again, full of Asian people, but I remembered no shouting. And I gave the mildest khutbah in my life. Okay. There was no raising my voice. There was nothing. It was just mild, like someone had given me a sedative, right? I had taken a sleeping tablet or something. I was so calm, right? As calm as a lamb. And at the end, some young people came to me, liked it, and said, mashallah, whatever. Then I had this queue of elderly uncles. And in my mind, I'm thinking, they are not going to tell me that I was shouting too loudly, because there's no way I was shouting. So the first one comes and he says, on behalf of the rest of the uncles and committee members, when you give a dars, Abu Ali Asab, it's good to be gentle and good to be calm, because it's a dars. But for khutbahs, you need to have some josh. You need to have some spirit, some give it. It turned out that these uncles are all from Pakistan. Okay, so the first masjid, Indian uncles, they like it calm. The second one, they did not like that khutbah at all, because it was just like a dars. And that's just the nature of people. Now, I'm not saying everyone in Pakistan is like that and everyone in India is like that, but on the whole, it's very difficult to find an Indian scholar, traditionally raised Indian scholar, who shouts and is really emotional, but yet you can find lots of Pakistani scholars who are like that. On the whole, okay. Just like on the whole, it's hard to find Saudi scholars who shout and were like that, but it's easy to find an Egyptian scholar. So like kind of, in my mind, I think of Pakistani scholars as they are exactly like the Egyptian, but with, different skins and different food likes and whatever. And Indian scholars remind me of Saudi scholars, or the other way around, very calm. Anyway, sometimes you find out these peculiarities in people. But I actually found that to be quite funny. So there must be a bit of tahdhir, but some of the ulama have said that post-religious Britain is a place really people don't respond well to tahdhir. Therefore, there must be a greater emphasis on tabshir, though not a total omission of tahdhir. Tahdhir must be used sparingly, like a pinch of salt sprinkled over food. Too little, and the tongue finds it unpalatable. It becomes too bland, the food. Too much, and it's likely to elicit an aversion. It's too salty. So the tahdhir is just like a pinch of salt. You don't want too much salt on your food, but there has to be a little bit of salt, otherwise it doesn't give it the right flavor. Is that clear? Is that point clear? Yes, no?
Alhamdulillah, yes, Sheikh.
Okay, so let's finish this point, point 10, because point 11 is slightly different, and it's one of the most important points, point 11 onwards. So some see in the next verse, which is going to come in a minute, a validation, a proof for not frightening people in such times with divine threats, out of concern for not driving them away. Okay, so some of the scholars, a number of Yemeni scholars have pointed this out to me. Lurk not on every road to threaten and bar people who believe in him from the path of Allah. do not lurk on the roadside to threaten people and to drive them away from the path of Allah. Now, this, whilst recalling the rule, that verse, okay, let's remember the rule. Al-ibra bi umumi lafz la bi khusus sabab. It's a rule in tafsir and usul al-fiqh. Consideration is given to the generality of the wording, not the specific cause for its revelation. So no doubt at all, this verse has a particular sabab al-nuzul. There's a particular reason why Allah revealed this verse in Surah Al-A'raf, and it has a particular context. Okay, it has a particular context, no doubt, and that context is about, I can't remember if it's jihad or brigandry. Maybe Dr. Salim will remember. However, we can take that same verse and learn some wider lessons from it as well. Okay, which is what? Do not lurk on every road to threaten people who believe in Allah from the path of Allah. So don't use too much tahdhir to a qawm, to a people who you know no longer respond well to tahdhir, to threats. We can't ignore it completely, but we utilize tahdhir, as was said before, like with a pinch of salt. And hence these ulama, and I've got this from one of the particular Yemeni scholars who's considered to be one of the alim awliya. Hence they say that in general, al-waqt, waqtu tabshir, la waqtu tahdhir. These times, meaning our times, are times of glad tidings, not times of warning. Okay, now that doesn't mean itlaq and absolutely, it just means we do more tabshir than we do tahdir, because of the nature of the people, because their religious himma, their religious resolve is well, it's not there at all, or it's just there a little, very fragile. And so we need to be careful. And we'll stop there. Point 11 is something else we need to bear in mind about the style of giving dawah. And then once we get past point 12 and 13, it then becomes very much on how to deal with atheists, or not how to deal with them, but what is the right outlook to have in this new situation of atheism. But we're just laying some foundations at the moment, foundations which apply to any dawah situation. Wallahu a'lam wa bihi tawfiq. Wa sallallahu wa sallama wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim.
Jazakallah Sheikh. Brother Iqbal want to ask one question.
Inshallah.
Brother Iqbal, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, okay. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So Jazakallah Sheikh. So you mentioned about the khutbah being, different. So our masjid over here, I'm from Detroit, and here, mashallah, Imam here, I own a masjid. So he actually keeps his tone high when he's in the khutbah, but normally he is fine. Then pretty much same situation, we had it over here, but then somehow we find out the Sunnah style also when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam giving khutbah, he's also raising his voice a little higher, to make his point. Is that something like, is that how it is?
No.
That's how, and in other words, let me put my question this way. How Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was to deliver the khutbah then?
Shaykh, the question of how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did his khutbah is very different than how should a khutbah be done to your people. They are two different questions, and aql demands that we make tamyiz, that we make a distinction between how did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam give a khutbah to his people, and between the question, what is the Sharia way to do a khutbah to your people? So if we remember that a khutbah is not a goal in itself, it's a means to a goal. Yes? The purpose of the khutbah has a maqsad. that maqsad, I mean, leaving alone some of the fiqhi differences on can the Jummah khutbah being in Arabic and not, and the Hanafi saying it's just dhikr, and the rest of the three schools saying no, it's more than dhikr, it's bayan and explanation. But so leaving that, let's just take the kind of majority view that the khutbah has a purpose, which is to remind them of a simple message, or teach them of a simple message, teach or remind, okay? And the Arabs, at the time of the Prophet, I mean, even now, their language is such that it works well in some places when you raise your voice and when you feel very passionate. And with that passion, your voice is raised, and he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his blessed eyes would go red a bit, and he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam's blessed voice would become higher and stronger, okay, as if he was warning them about an army just behind approaching them. This is how he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, gave khutbahs. He gave a khutbah, not that every time his voice is raised and his eyes would be red, but there are enough times where his voice is raised and his eyes are red, and yet he is still speaking very distinctly, very clearly. His words are not running into each other. They are very clear and concise, but there is passion. And part of that passion was to raise his voice. There is no doubt about that. The descriptions in the Sahih Hadiths, there are numerous descriptions like that. So that's how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave a khutbah. But the way he gave a khutbah is not the fixed pattern. If the people, the nature of the people, if giving the khutbah this way is unsuitable for the nature of the people. If the people do not respond well to being very passionate, such that your voice is raised and you're quite emotional and passion driven, if that puts people off and that is not their urf and ada, then you don't give a khutbah like that. Or you minimize the places in the khutbah where that happens. That is what the Sharia teaches you. And that's why there is a difference. And this is why the Prophet's Sunnah is not like it's not like a computer program. It's not like an algorithm. You just put something in and it doesn't matter what computer you put it into, it will read it the same. The Prophet's Sunnah is humanness. It's the pinnacle of insaniyah. It's the pinnacle of ubudiyya. It's the pinnacle of humanness. It's the pinnacle of servitude and worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's the pinnacle of humanness in the sense of don't think the Prophet was a machine, like an AI, artificial intelligence, that we just copy him and that it fits just like that. Of course, there is this general obligation for ittiba, to emulate and imitate and copy the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but also understand the fiqh behind it, the purpose behind it, the understanding behind it. This is the difference between a good alim, a good scholar, and a lalupanju, just a basic, nice Muslim, but he's an idiot when it comes to Sharia matters. Okay, we need to have understanding. Okay, likewise, for example, the Prophet ﷺ would repeat things often 3 times. Okay. Sometimes you try repeating things 3 times in English to an English, modern 21st century English audience, and they'll find it strange. In fact, even if you go to Makkah, Medina and gave a khutbah, and you're one of the imams, they're giving a khutbah, it's very unusual for you to repeat something 3 times. It's not the way people work anymore. It's not the way that they speak anymore. Okay. So you have to know the nature of the people. It's not just, oh, the sunnah in the khutbah is what? No. You know, the sunnah in the khutbah is put your heart in it, bismillah, I'm sure, but putting your heart in it can be done in 101 different ways. So the Prophet gave a khutbah, and he gave it in particular ways, as is described in the Sahih Hadiths. But the way we give khutbahs in terms of the style may not have to be exactly the same, depending upon the nature of the people. I hope that's clear, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. Yeah, it is clear.
So Detroit is down on the East Coast, is that right? No? Or am I wrong there? Where's Detroit?
Yeah, it's in Michigan. It's a border town to Canada, actually. So
oh, it's
Canada
up there.
is
It's up there. Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yes, I remember now. Detroit is up there. Used to be the car industry of America once upon a time, right?
It is. Yeah, it is.
Oh, it's right. Okay. So I don't know. I have no idea how the nature of Detroit people, people from Detroit are. But let's just say they are a bit like people in Texas. Then the kind of raising your voice and getting a bit emotional probably will work well. But if they're kind of a bit like, your average kind of like Church of England, congregation, they're not going to like that at all. It's not their way. So you have to just work out what is the best way. You might find that there is no one way in modern Detroit, in 21st century Detroit, and you can do a mixture of all. But what we cannot do, and what we must be getting out of, is this thing, well, the Prophet did it, therefore it must be Sharia. No, not necessarily. Otherwise, Desi people and Pakistani people are going to have a real nightmare when they realize that the Prophet, when he could have ate spicy food, he never ate spicy food. There is a spice trade, but he doesn't use spice in his food. So is eating spicy food khilaf sunnah? This will destroy the Islam of most Indian and Pakistani people, really, and Bengalis, if you throw them in the equation. But no, it's not a sunnah. It's nothing to do with sunnah. It's to do with ada, to do with cultural habits. Okay. And we are at a stage in our religion, and in the stage in the ummah, where the ummah can't afford to think that they can follow these higher ways of, they're not called sunnahs, but the ada mubarak of the Prophet when they haven't even established themselves on his sunnah. And in fact, before they establish themselves on his sunnah, they should just do tarkul haram first, leaving haram. Okay, there are so many harams that we haven't left, basic harams that on the whole Muslim communities haven't left. There is really little point in emphasizing lots of sunnahs, let alone emphasizing something that isn't a sunnah. He ﷺ would undo his top button of his qamis, whether in winter or summer. It's not a sunnah, it's just from his ada. Okay, we don't see Umar radiallahu anhu doing it, but we see his son doing it. But I'm pretty sure that his winters, the Arabian winters, where you can afford to undo your top button, is not like New York winters or London winters or Canadian winters, where the snow falls and temperatures plummet to -1, -2, or -5, -10, -15. Where you can quite happily, comfortably undo your top button. No, we'll be wearing polar necks and scarves, rather. So understand what the sunnah is there for. It's not a robotic thing, inshallah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, Brother Iqbal.
Jazakallah, Sheikh. I guess that's all. There's no much more question.
Excellent, alhamdulillah. So let's continue next week, inshallah ta'ala, from point 11 onwards. So if someone can remind me to just let's start at point 11. We're now going to get into some real inward things to do with the sunnah, to do with dawah. So not external things of good manners and this and have the right urf and ada, but something now inward, which becomes harder before we get onto the actual atheism bit, inshallah. And one final thing, I just posted on the Ilm-al web or Ilm-al blog this morning, a very thorough article called Islam's Evolution Question. It's probably one of the most thorough scholastic pieces on evolution from mainstream evolution perspective and Islamic theology or Aqidah perspective, inshallah ta'ala. So do please try to access that. And if you do find it beneficial, please share it with others, inshallah ta'ala, because it is, the issue is important and clarity must be given on it. And it also tackles some of the modern Muslim ideas that there's a difference between insan and bashar, which there isn't, or there's that Adam alayhi salam, the qissa of Adam alayhi salam, the story of Adam is a metaphor, is allegorical, is majazi. It tackles that issue as well, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakumullah khair.
Okay, inshallah.
Thank you very much. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruk wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam.